Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with the SAP IP Business Talks. And today, as already announced this morning, with this little licensing engine, we talk about licenses, and not just in general as an instrument or tool. I think that is well known. When we talk about Thomas, and Thomas is for a longer time already IP subject matter expert at the IP Business Academy, we talk with Thomas always about these very specific aspect of the controlling of licensing compliance, and that has good reasons, because we can say that's basically the execution of the whole thing. So here really the business comes into play. So it's not anymore a contract per se. It is really the question how the contract with the business interacts. Thomas, thank you very much for being again with us. Would
Yeah,
you start maybe? So not everybody followed our ongoing discussion, also on LinkedIn and here in the live show. So it would be great when you could tell us a little bit about your background, a bit about the background of Connor. I have the feeling that not everybody is familiar with that topic and area, and explain us a little bit, how did you personally came into this strange field of IP?
absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here again for the second time. I know we had an interesting conversation last time as well, and look forward to continuing in that trend. And for people that don't know Connor or myself, so we are a global license compliance firm. We are specialized in only licensing compliance, and we basically try to add value with our services across really any industry that has three things. And those three things are typically a license agreement, which I think a lot of people on this call will be familiar with. The second thing that is often good to have is revenue, licensing revenue itself through royalty generation. And then the third thing is an audit right within that contract. And wherever you have those three things, we tend to be able to add value and strengthen the relationships with the licensees and licensors. So you're talking technology licensing, you have music, royalty compliance, even there's brand licensing, there is pharma as well, biotechnology licensing. So running royalty rates across license agreements, that's typically where we try to add value. We're everywhere in the world. We're a global firm, and that's kind of what differentiates us. We like to talk the language, both literally and figuratively, that the licensees speak. Those cultural nuances often really help in making sure that the relationships are intact, even when the royalty audit is performed. And apart from that, myself, I've been with the firm now for 6 years, I think, coming up, and I was at Deloitte before this, where I basically did the same thing, contract compliance in Brussels. And the reason why I chose this profession is, obviously, Alex, was a childhood dream of mine to become a royalty auditor. So it's the first thing I said, first words out of my mouth. No, uh,
I don't believe you.
all joking aside, I grew up traveling, and I just wanted to find a job that kind of fit. So I literally, kind of went with a profession that was both
Okay.
in the professional context and the travel context. So that's the
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
short of it. Yeah,
Got you.
yeah.
So, and for the ones who have not followed to what we said and did so far, so you run a very successful page on the Dplex with your profile as IP subject matter expert, and you offer here plenty of information and know-how around this issue. And very important, there is now a new service from your side, and this comes here, so that you made a new white paper available. So tell us, what's about this white paper? What are you explaining there, and what is important about that?
Yeah, a brief overview as well, because I'm sure that we'll get into some of the things in our conversation. But the white paper basically is supposed to reframe the shift in mentality and the shift in I guess business acumen that we see in the licensing industry itself. So as you said, we are a little itty bitty kind of nuance within the broader scheme of what licensing is, but a very important one, I'd argue. And I think as licensing grows and the complexity of licensing grows into contractual realities, there's a lot of R value I feel that is beneficial to both licensor and licensee.
So exactly, let me point that out, because you said that the complexity is rising, and
Right.
I think that we had that discussion at the CTO forum here for CTOs from the DACH region, and there was this upcoming discussion that are mainly classical, let's say, machine manufacturing companies, and we had this discussion about software as a machine as a service, or then on top software as a service or pay per use. So all these more fancy business models compared to just a transaction. So I give you the machine and you pay for the machine, and then ownership's going over, and that's it, so to speak, and the rest is
Right.
maybe maintenance. And there are these famous cases from Trumpf, von Hilti, which are quite successful with it. But obviously, the complexity becomes higher and higher in such deals. And the CTO, Mr. Wehr from Vorwerk, he mentioned then that typically you have also to orchestrate, to organize a full business ecosystem around that. So it is not just this one product, this one service, because at the end, the customers expect a certain customer experience, and typically you are not the only one who is offering something. It starts with the computer, with the operating system, with all of that, with the internet, which does not come from you, you use it just.
Right.
And so is that your experience, and is that reflected in the white paper, that this rising complexity has to be managed to make it operable and to make it profitable and to grow business with these logic of licenses?
Partially, yeah. The IoT space as well is one of those examples where you're just going to see an exponential explosion of the complexities that arise with all the device manufacturing and the licensing of the devices or the content. We see a big shift as it goes to like more content licensing than device licensing. But the white paper I think is supposed to kind of look at obviously license compliance, where we stand, from a more proactive approach and looking at it as a value driver, and basically stop looking at it as a cost center and something that is kind of done only ad hoc, and looking at it from a value driver, and again, not just for licensor but also for licensee.
Okay. So it is strongly recommended for people who are around that topic to download that paper, which really comes directly from practice and from your experience. And we have a little announcement. So we don't want to talk here in the IP Business Academies live talk just about theories, or just consultants or service providers talk with each other. We think it is extremely important that also the industry practice, so to a certain extent, the users of the IP system are integrated in that discussion. And the announcement is that one of your clients will join us at the 1st of July, and I think some of the audience have already heard about that company. Could you tell us who will come?
Yeah, it's a very small company. Yeah, no. So we're fortunate enough to have one of our clients join us for the next conversation that we'll be having, so that we actually bring that industry kind of firsthand experience to the conversation, to the audience. So definitely look forward to that. And it is none other than ARM, the semiconductor giant that will have on the discussion with us. I'm really looking forward to that session, which will obviously be not just me as a service provider, kind of talking about how amazing our stuff is, but also having obviously the client themselves, kind of from their perspective, kind of showcasing how they're optimally leveraging these type of tools and these type of services for their purposes as well,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's eventually what's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I would say ARM is a wonderful example for showing also the yeah, the size of such programs, but also the complexity of such programs. So ARM is in smartphones in also these RISC processors. RISC stands for reduced instruction set computing. So it's a specific kind of very, very effective processors, and these processors are in smartphones, tablets, in embedded systems, wearables, smart home servers, personal computers, name it. So just that, these huge variants of products with different price points, and then also the companies which are licensed. So it's Apple, Qualcomm, Samsung, Nvidia. They are all licensees from ARM. So this is unbelievable. So it's really the who is who on the tech scene. And just to make clear which company we're talking about, ARM-based processors are used in 95% of all smartphones and tablets on this planet. 95%. So billions of these ARM chips are shipped to all the other manufacturers of these products, which are everywhere around. So I'm really curious and looking forward to our discussion of 1st of July. And that brings me to some of the questions which I would like to discuss before we talk with ARM, and that we are well prepared, so to speak, to this Praxis discussion. And the
sure.
first thing is there are different terms. I mean, even a compliance, as a contract licensing contract compliance, is something which not everybody has already heard. Yeah, so we make our job that it becomes more and more prominent in the IP field. But there are topic also aspects like a proactive and a reactive compliance. Okay,
Right.
and that is sounds fascinating, and obviously it has something to do with the timing of the audit, and how it is proceed. So can you explain us the difference and the pros and cons for these approaches?
Absolutely, and that's a good question. I think part of the main kind of mindset shift that we're seeing out there happening, and this is not just unique to kind of what we're seeing from our perspective, but just more generally in the licensing industry as it relates to the compliance, is that reactive compliance, if you will, it kind of happens after the facts, and it's more when there's an issue or a dispute or a shortfall. A trigger occurs, and an unhappy partner, let's say, is coming to light. And I always like to use the analogy. It's like waiting for your car to break down before you go for a checkup.
Okay.
Um, right. And proactive compliance for me, on the other hand, is having a regular maintenance check that you actually build into your licensing lifecycle. It doesn't abuse the audit rights. Actually, it uses them. It makes sure that you look at performance indicators, and you risk score your licensees as well, to make sure that you're actually doing it like tailored and fit for purpose, so that you're not overbearing any of your partners, and you use it more strategically. And I understand that many still hesitate currently, because they do see that as kind of maybe a relationship, kind of blocker, if you will, to a certain degree, or it could potentially impede on the relationship. But um, that really is just a misconception. And obviously, like, if you wait till the time where it will become a strain on the relationship, then you are in those really unfortunate positions where you have to negotiate things that you could have prevented by, again, having that checkup a little bit sooner. And the data shows it, right? So 85% of all audits that not only we, but the industry that we operate in have conducted, have variances in their royalty payments. And again, I'm not even discussing good faith, bad faith. That's really irrelevant, because we operate always that licensees operating in good faith. And 85% is quite the staggering number. And
Yeah,
of
yeah.
those, also 25% have a variance of over 100% of their actually reported revenue. So I think the data kind of speaks for itself there.
Yeah, yeah. So what I understand is these proactive things. So you said maintenance. So it has, so it is an integrative part of the business. So that's my understanding. That means when I want to run the thing, and I want to have a forward-looking, a management business orientated way to integrate this licensing in my business, then I have to do it as like a maintenance, like a continuous controlling whether everything works smooth. And again, when we see how complex these things can become and how big, I mean, when you run that whatever 12 months before you have the next audit, that can make things extremely complicated to find out what's wrong here. So as a
Right.
continuous activity, for me that makes absolutely sense. And that there is not a, that is no accident, nothing has to happen. Simply make sure that all the decisions through the months are fine, and that are so dynamic environments that obviously we have every week, every month, we have business decisions, and it is necessary to keep track whether this is aligned with the fundamentals of the business. And this is typically that you get the license to use that technology and to integrate it in your products.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And proactive compliance isn't about the control. It's about visibility. And I always like to say that without it, you're kind of licensing in the dark to a certain degree, because licensees have their, as you said, their day to day. Licensors have their day to day. They have to invest into, kind of making sure that those licenses and the IP is even, more value adding to the licensees. So a successful licensee is a successful licensor. However, often after the agreements have been signed, and nota bene, a lot of time is spent into these agreements and these contracts. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into these things, and it almost feels unfortunate that you would not follow up on that reality and have just a due diligence check to make sure that the licensees are aware of what that their understanding is in line with how the spirit of the agreement was initially agreed upon. So it not only leads to, I guess, the right revenue allocated in the right place, ultimately, but it also leads to often more clarity around reporting standards that need to be adopted. It can help reduce complexities across the licensee base, and it often helps kind of reset those expectations and make sure that you actually have more value as you go down the line.
Yeah, and simply having the figures right. Yeah, so depending on, I mean, there are the very simple contracts, but typically in that size, these contracts are not simple, and even which amount of products should be taken into account, or you have products which come to resellers, and product which comes to whatever system integrators, and so on, and that can all be distinguished and different treated for good reasons. And I mean, my point here is that it is these kind of licensing contracts are really the basis of the business, right? So without that, this is what we call in the master program, CPEPO master program for IP law and management, what we call a asset center. Okay, so it has to be organized like a mission critical center, asset, because otherwise you cannot run your business. This is what I'm telling the students. I said, you know whether something is really an asset. So when you put it away from the company and the company wouldn't work anymore, so then you know it's an asset. Yeah.
Right.
So it's very simple. And without these kind of contracts, and the availability then of this technology, which is mission critical for the products, it is absolutely clear that it has to be managed like an asset, and that means it has to be managed and not just underwritten. Yeah, so it's fine that you have your contract in the first place, but obviously people have to understand, and yeah, as you said, bookkeeping, and yeah, the figures has to be there. So
Yep.
I cannot understand that this is not the general practice, that also the licensor recommend to the licensee to make that happen as a bundle, because otherwise the yeah, it's a very high risk that things run sour sooner or later.
Right. And I think there are licensors out there that have these kind of in-house compliance checks as well, but ultimately I think, the core of what your time is spent on and your focus is ultimately, is most best spent on the most added value time that you have available to you. So from our perspective, our company, we've only focused in these things. So typically we go a little bit deeper, we have a little bit more insights, and we can kind of benchmark across industries as well to make sure that we give the extra to our clients.
Okay, so we have a question from the audience. Leila asked for proactive compliance. How early in the process do you get involved? So that's an interesting question. So is it from day one after the contract is signed, or is there a regular meeting established? So how is that down to earth organized?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'd say it really depends on the licensing journey that you are in, or that a potential company looking to explore licensing compliance is in. So there's a couple of best practices, and we like to think of it as having three tiers. You have your top tier that typically is your 80/20 principle, applies here as well. You have your mid tier, and then you have your long tail of licensees that are not as revenue generating currently, but obviously as a licensor, you'd want your licensees to be successful, and you hope that all of them become top tier after a while as well. So depending on where you are in that journey, we would say there's different approaches to that. And I always like to compare it to playing golf. You have different clubs for different parts of the, part of your game. And same as for compliance. We don't have to do a full royalty audit on a, let's say, a long tail licensee that obviously needs a different approach, that maybe needs to be just called up or asked about, how they're doing, how's the business going, what kind of initiatives are you working on, and where can licensor actually best support those initiatives. So that's the collaborative aspect of it as well that we're trying to highlight. Is so for the long tail, it tends to be more kind of data driven and more technology driven, scalable solutions that you can apply across the long tail. For the mid tier, we tend to see best practices more in the run-of-the-mill royalty audits, where we can go a little bit deeper and have those conversations, maybe a desk review first, so that it's not too imposing on the licensee's businesses, so that we actually capture the right data for the purpose of where they are in their journey. And then you have the top tier where obviously clients will have their very strong relationships with, and there we advise maybe every 3 to 5 years to just perform a royalty audit basically.
Okay, so what I learned is that obviously also the intentional economy takes into account here. So this is when you say we have the long tail and the short tail. So obviously there are some companies which really have the major contribution to the whole business. It's like the value of patents or whatever. It's always the same in the intentional economy. And then you have the long tail with many companies which do not so much contributing to the revenue or growth of the licensor.
But hopefully they will at some point. And
Yeah, absolutely.
being a licensor that is tuned in to even that long tail, it just enables more data for you and insights to help them out to become that next top tier player.
Yeah, and obviously they license the same technology, so they have also um, comparables and understanding. So we decided now that we switch to HubSpot and go away from Salesforce, simply because HubSpot delivers us a community
Mm.
around these software, and that has a value per se. And interesting enough, that happened never um, for Salesforce, and that is for me exactly one of these additional aspects why it makes sense to become a part of such licensing programs, that you have peers and you can learn from each other, and you don't have to see it as a zero-sum game in competition. Now, Amele,
Absolutely.
one of our ambassadors, she has a very good question. Thank you, Amelie. We make the white paper available. It is already available on the Dplex, and but we give you the link to the white paper on this Dplex page after the live show. We write it in the chat, and then you get access to it. Okay, so Thomas, I have heard that from you many times, but I would like to understand it a bit better.
Yeah.
So when people hear compliance and controlling, they think about policing. Yeah, so
Right.
they're policing even. So somebody comes in and say, okay, now make your books open, and I want to get here every kind of data and control and whatever. So and you say that again and again, and I can really understand that, but I think it should be discussed a bit. And you say a relationship centric approach
Yeah.
makes much more sense when it comes to compliance, simply because there is no black and white. The world is gray and is complex, and it is nobody's fault, or as you said, bad faith, for being not compliant. That is not these intentionally behavior to hide something. So it's simply that uh, due to the complexity and to the dynamic environment, that can relatively easily happen, and also that the companies learn, and maybe the contract was done 2 years ago, and meanwhile we have also a learning curve and we know things better, and that is, I think, your point when you say these relationship orientated approach makes much more sense, that both sides, in this case, a licensor and licensee, should understand each other and should do the best to improve the business for both. And could you explain us a little bit how that is implemented really down to earth, and in a day-to-day practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And you raise an interesting point, and I think it mostly has to do with how it's framed. So if a licensor approaches it as a best practice and approaches it as framing it that this is going to be happening, and this is just something we do because we care about the relationship, and you frame it that way from the get-go, then there is going to be no concern when, let's say the audit is kicked off. If you, however, approach this as a purely reactive kind of tool, if you will, then I can understand that licensees will maybe be concerned, or have their objections, because like, why now? You normally never do this, and why are you choosing to audit this now versus before? So not that we're not able to answer those questions, it's just that the framing there starts from the beginning. So if you see, and we also see audits not as kind of like refereeing, to use another analogy. We see it more as like coaching, if you will, and making sure that the playing field is leveled there, and to unlock more performance, hopefully through our audit reports. There's no CFO in the world that goes through a financial audit and is assumed of wrongdoing, right? That's not a reality. That's not why audits are done. It's part of governance, and it's about framing that as a value add, and as a relationship aspect as well. So clarity, not suspicion, sharing scope, being completely transparent with the methodology, walking through the expectations from day one, typically lowers the temperature with between, should there be a concern, obviously. And we do this more than 100 times per year, quite successfully, and all our clients still have really good relationships with their licensees. So just from an experience perspective, we can attest to the fact that it really doesn't harm. It actually strengthens those relationships, and it actually allows for those collaborative moments where you can look at, hey, even if there's overpayments done by the licensee, for example, like, you wouldn't want that to be consistently happening. You would want your licensee to be able to have their budget allocated to their core and their focus. So it's making sure that, I guess, those operational inefficiencies, and the financial discipline as well is tightened basically throughout. That's kind of the mindset that we try to also talk to licensees through. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I like really this picture of a coaching relationship. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I try to explain to my students, and also when companies come up and say, okay, we want to run here a license project, and when they are unexperienced in what that means. So quite often the company representative hears a continuous stream of money. Okay, and I just deliver a right. So, and
Right.
the rest is done by my licensee. So, and obviously it is something completely different, and especially these two parties have to stay attractive for each other over a long time.
Right.
And that simply this is a relationship. It is one. And it is much more a relationship compared to selling a product and reducing the rest to maintenance, yeah, or a guarantee or whatever. But the fact is that in a licensing cooperation, these stay attractive. So the licensor should continuously be attractive to the licensee, and overpayments make it less attractive, for
Right.
example.
Right.
And the licensee should be also attractive to the licensor in using this asset to the best effort, and with the best result. And
Right.
and due to complexity and to changing environments, this relationship has to be maintained, has to be nurtured. And that's why I'm like so much this picture analogy of a coaching situation, because I can, because you learn things from the licensees which are important for the licensors to become more attractive, and you can explain to the licensor why certain expectations are making them not more attractive to the licensee, and the other way around. So that's really this kind of exchange which is so important, because it is an ongoing relationship, or not just a transaction which is gone.
Right. Yeah. It is a two-way street ultimately, as you said, and transparency really, I feel, is the currency here. And not that transparency from an internal sharing confidential information, because that's why we are a CPA firm, because we know how to handle confidential information and we know what we can and cannot share from a third party perspective. But ultimately, you can, if you just look at it from a day-to-day practical perspective, where the contract is signed, people go about their own business, and then ultimately what happens is people get promoted or people leave, and maybe the handover of what the contract represents isn't done
Yeah,
exactly with the diligence that it should have, because again, we have our own priorities, and it's not necessarily done from bad faith, but just because we want to make sure that we're running our businesses properly. So it often happens that we come in and we actually have open dialogue with the licensees, and they'll mention that they've had maybe problems or challenges kind of classifying certain products, and how do we treat these products. And licensors have a lot of business activities to do as well, and can't always get back on time to the licensees to review those vast amount of products and SKUs. So having that touch point between the auditor in this case and the licensee is also it's just it can be very therapeutic. Almost, it can be very like almost like a
mhm,
rundown of everything that they've been experiencing over the years, without having that one-to-one with the licensor, and opening up basically the conversation to how do we not it's not about rectifying the past necessarily, so, but it's about how do we make sure we the spirit of the contract is moving forward optimized for. And then that obviously is a recurring theme as time continues and businesses change.
got you. I have a question from Dirk, and that's really a good one. I'm not sure, Dirk Schulze, I'm not sure whether you can answer it in full, or you want to write something later on in the chat. But Dirk really nails the point down and say, okay, wonderful relationship orientated, positive coaching whatsoever, but you need a contractual basis for that. And what are your, so to speak, recommendations at least um, uh, for this audit provision? So obviously that has to be a part of the licensing agreement.
Right.
What is there a kind of best practice, a kind of recommendation which you could give at the moment, or could you say something later on in the chat?
It's a very good question, and it's one that we often get, and one of the clauses that we read the most as well, because
Yeah, obviously.
it defines if we are even able to do the work in the first place, of course. So I can definitely give more insights, for Dirk, if it's specific to a specific industry or something, because it does change a little bit per industry, and per, I guess, rights that an auditor would need to be able to perform their duties. But there are kind of like boilerplates that I can speak to now a little bit, that just defines, the auditor should be kind of reasonably cooperated with. Obviously, this should be done within the business hours of the licensee. The auditor also should schedule around these things with
Okay.
licensee as flexibly as possible. I mean, that's just something we do regardless, and not something that needs to be in the audit clause itself. Um, but then also having the ability to request for data and information that pertains to the ability of the auditor to assess the accuracy and the completeness of the royalty reporting.
Mhm.
That's kind of the most generic.
But just to, okay, yeah, wonderful. For me,
Yeah.
it's already very enlightening. But uh, when you say it's different for different industries, could you give us an idea why it is so?
It mostly has to do with the amount of data involved
Ah,
with such an audit. So, for example, a music royalty audit, it could go up to billions of lines of data, and then there's slightly different protocols that can come into play. But then on, let's say, the more manufacturing side, the more, I guess, non-digital way of auditing as well, there are very sensitive pieces of information that the auditor could potentially get a hold of. And although obviously we will sign NDAs, we will make sure that, again, we are a CPA firm, we do this as a business. So our reputation stands and falls with our ability to handle sensitive information. But
mhm,
still, certain industries are so highly sensitive that the audit rights tend to be, I wouldn't say negotiated upon to the degree that we can't do our jobs anymore, but it tends to be very specific on what the auditor can and cannot request.
mhm.
A more
Got you. Got you.
broader audit right would be the auditor can ask whatever the auditor deems relevant, which is, in our case, we would only ask for those things anyway, because we also have our businesses to run, and we don't like auditing just for the sake of it. We like to do it because it adds value to both licensor and licensee.
Yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense. Makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Obviously, that makes a huge difference. The amount of data, the quality of data, and the source of data, and so on. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously. Um, um, when we are with the data, I have another question which we have
Sure.
already discussed, but I would like to ask you that. Um, uh, the point is that you have a perspective on a company which more or less nobody has. So um, you look at a company from a completely different angle than the typical, financial auditing, or a bank, an investor, whoever. So they make all different things, and nobody stands up and say, "Okay, now I would really like to understand your licensing situation." So what is that? Yeah. But this is exactly your point of view. And as we said, um, quite often this kind of license is really an asset, because it drives the growth of the company, or basically the company itself, and hopefully the growth. And that means I could imagine that with this unique, quite often unique perspective, you could unlock really hidden revenue or opportunities, or also operational inefficiencies,
Right.
which is not detected normally, because nobody has this lens on the processes. And
Right.
how could you how so first, is that true? And second, how can you make that available, so to speak?
Right. Good questions. And, we are somewhat, I guess, limited in our ability to report on certain things because of the NDAs and all that, all the confidentiality around it. But we do try to add as much value as we can through, just calling out where the variances and discrepancies are, even the non-monetary ones. So if you look at it from, even if it's a reporting structure, let's say you're a new licensor, you've got 5 licensees, that's very manageable for you in the beginning, 5 licensees reporting into you. But I imagine the ambition is to scale that. So, are you set for that scale? Are you set for the nuances for a 100 to 200 licensee portfolio that potentially will have bespoke contracts to a certain degree, and will have different SKUs, will have different kind of, synergies with your IP. So we have insights into those things that we happily help our clients, kind of help build. But then the audits themselves also uncover where why are things going, going the way they are going. And when I say, why, I mean, is there a misunderstanding on either the licensors and the licensee side of what is a licensed product, b, how is the royalty calculated? So if you really go into the kind of the, the raw of it, is, there's different ways that the royalty can be payable, and there's different mathematical formulas associated with that, and it's not always clear to both parties what is and what does not constitute a relevant deduction to the,
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
revenue streams, or
Yeah,
what are
and what
products
is
that are in scope.
what I so much like on what you say is this is exactly that kind of matching and calculating is where IP hits the business. This is exactly this interface, and this is far beyond trivial. But it is exactly where you can see, and this is a data which is obviously unique, and most of the time you are not allowed to talk about it. But from the logic, this is something which is absolutely relevant when you want to create portfolios, when you want to make the next licensing contract. So you accumulate an unique amount of knowledge in for the knowledge economy, where the IP side hits or meet the
Right.
business, and how to optimize that. I
And
mean, because you see it in your audience, in the reality.
exactly. And the reality is, and you mentioned HubSpot before and Salesforce, and not that I want to necessarily put the two against each other, because I like them both. But but apart from that, I think, that it's a CRM, right? And a CRM ultimately has its own purpose. It has its own, raison d'être for being, what they're supposed to be achieving for their customers. And I guarantee it's not royalty tracking. That's not why ERPs and CRMs and all the, like, all that good stuff that make business a lot easier, they're not built for tracking the 1% of the, the revenue that is a royalty stream. And it makes sense that it's not built for that, because it is not a priority for those systems. But it is a priority for us, and that's, I think, where we come in, is that we kind of make sure that whatever the realities haven't covered is where we try and add that value. Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Thomas. I want to show to everybody again this incredible licensing engine which we talked about for the last 45 minutes. So as a summary, I would say a strong recommendation to download the white paper, and a strong recommendation to join us at the 1st of July. We will talk together with ARM and their licensing programs, and that is definitely something which is relevant for the knowledge economy out there. Thomas, thank you very much for joining us today. By the way, I did that with the video generation tool from it's VO3 from Gemini this morning, and I asked ChatGPT to explain me how you would visualize a licensing engine, and then I used that explanation to let Google Gemini make a video for it. So
Nice.
with this impression, thank you very much to all of you. I hope you will be back at the 1st of July. We give you the link for the download, and enjoy your Wednesday. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely. And if everyone has any questions, obviously feel free to reach out to me directly as well. There's a lot more that I can share about the different tier structures and how you can use data as well to navigate the licensing compliance space in itself. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining, and look forward to our next conversation.
And as I explained today on the LinkedIn chat, you find at the LinkedIn profile from Thomas wonderful articles which really go in depth of the whole discussion. Maybe also for you, Dirk, that is something which is very informative on that topic. So thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.